Right. How are you all doing? I am here with Sudhanshu Kaushik. Sudhanshu is a fairly interesting guy. I've only known you so long, and our mutual friend is probably going to be here soon. But Sudhanshu studied international relations and human rights at NYU before he went on to pursue a master's degree in modern South Asia at Oxford University, and finally arriving at Columbia to pursue a PhD program in Middle Eastern and South Asian studies. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's
Right now, Sudhanshu is on a leave of absence focusing on his pet project. He's the founder of Young India Foundation. I would let him describe Young India Foundation because I think that'd be more judicious. So, Sudhanshu, help me understand what is Young India Foundation?
Young India Foundation is India's first political action committee that focuses solely on young people. And the idea is, I would say the mission statement is trying to make politics from the panchayat to the parliament accessible and inclusive to India's young.
Fair, fair. You have spent a considerable amount of time playing between what I thought were two sides. Turns out it is three. You lived in India, you've lived in England, and you've lived in America. You've you've gone to NYU, you've gone to Columbia, you've gone to Oxford. What do you think switching between India, America? How do you think switching between India, America, and England influenced you? How did that play a role in Sudhanshu as of today?
I think I hate to say this, but it's the means to an end, right? And I think that I get a lot of criticism for studying, living, staying in foreign from other people that I'm in India. To me personally, I would never trade it in because first of all, I never had an opportunity to kind of go back because of obviously of my parents' decisions. And then once I was old enough to consciously make these decisions, I decided that what I was receiving here was much more valuable to me at this point, and then eventually go back to India. So I think at the end of the day, anything that I've learned, taken away, had access or resources to, the things that I've done, whether it's Young India Foundation, whether before it was other organizations like Equality Initiative and things of that nature, I've been able to do because of the resources and accessibility here. Learned and taken away. We were just speaking about interdisciplinary studies. I think that I myself am a product of, and I don't think that to the extent is available in India, and I don't think I would be able to do what I'm doing if I hadn't had my background in the United States primarily. England sucks. I hate it. Don't go there.
Too posh for you?
No, I think it's just the academic context to me was disappointing, to say the least. And
Even at Oxford.
at Oxford, it sucked. They live in an academic bubble, and I'm not a fan of the academic bubble. Over there, it's about theory, literature. What does the literature say? What do these say? But when it comes down to practicality, there's none of that. They'd like to fool themselves into thinking that there's practicality in their literature and their field work and research of 6 months, and then basing their entire career out of that 6 month field work.
Right.
I've seen that done, but there's not. India is ever evolving, and I'm talking about area studies completely just India centric, right? I
Right.
don't like to speak out of something that I don't know of,
Right.
but India is ever evolving, ever changing, and adapting. And I don't think you can that's what academics try to do, make a career out of a 6 month field work, right?
Right. It's you. It seems like you sort of mean that there is India at the pace that it's evolving. There is absolutely no way that you would contend with the saturation in theory as far as India is concerned, right? Because the theory by effect would saturate the view of your
Yeah, I
discipline.
mean, I guess that's a very pretentious way of saying it.
All of what I say is
I see
highly
that.
pretentious. Yes.
I see that.
I
But
twist words to make meaning.
yeah, I hope that makes you feel better. But at the end of the day, I think it's very practical. Uh, yeah, what you said in terms of we're going into a nation that has constantly been evolving and changing, and the present day borders have been changed in the past 70 years. And in the next 70 years, I do believe that India's borders will change. Cultures, traditions are evolving as well, and modernity, as it comes in, has, I think, kind of reformed society at a very ever-growing pace. So we'd like to think that India is still quote unquote backwards, or India is still quote unquote regressive, but literally day by day, if you're living it, if you're breathing it, if you're seeing it, they're changing and evolving.
Right.
And I think someone like you probably has seen that, and I just don't think that at the end of the day, again, I'm reiterating it, but you go in for 6 months, do this field work, and then off and on, you're just like doing it, and it's masquerading of an in-depth research that they have justified in a short amount of time, and I just don't believe in that. And at the end of the day, I mean, I think we're going too much into this, but
Right.
I think that there's just so much out there in terms of India's borders. There's a bit of feedback coming in, right?
I know. I'm
Yeah.
quite surprised.
Yeah, but I just think it's so fascinating. It's a shame that people try to make it into something so short.
Right. When in the process of shifting between America and England and India, did you come up with the idea for Young India Foundation?
That was always there. So even though I had my academic background in the States, I took every opportunity that I could, whether it was in the middle of summer, in the middle of winter, shifting, taking 6 months off of school, like 4 times, not 3 times. I've taken 4 months off, a semester off of even high school, and junior high school, made up grades, done online classes, etc., just to be in India, right? So I think I would say I've also been brought up in India in a way, and maybe not in the amount of time that others might have, smaller time, but still. And at that time, I got these opportunities to explore, especially politics more. Working with over 10 MLAs, 2 MPs. I've seen political campaigning and politics to a closer degree, and not necessarily from Delhi or Bombay, but
More
Gaon,
grassroots,
Gaon
right?
se,
Right,
right?
right, right.
Middle of nowhere Haryana, middle of nowhere Punjab. So I've seen that essence, and I think it's kind of changed my outlook. And I also had that privilege of being in the United States, so being able to digest this very English, fast-paced kind of news as well,
Right.
and politics. So, looking at policy from a very theoretical perspective, got that privilege, but then also had the opportunity to see a very grassroots level. And one thing that I always saw, and I guess it formalized the older I got, was the disparity of young people, of young people's voices, of the intentions for young people, and policy being made that doesn't kind of gear towards young people. So I think that's where the background was. And honestly, I was sick and tired of hearing every single politician, whether it was a sarpanch for a village candidate or whether it was the Pradhan Mantri himself, saying youth desh ko badlega. Right?
Youth will change the
The
nation,
youth will
right.
change the country. Yeah, I'm
Right.
sorry.
No,
I
that's
was
fine.
sick and tired of that concept because they would deliver this rhetorical remark without justifying it by any means.
Right.
How will we change the world? In all youth development indexes, we do abysmally. We are 133 out of 183 countries according to the last Youth Development Index. We're behind countries like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, but we are in front of countries like South Sudan, which is going in the midst of a civil war, or Syria. Should we be patting ourselves on the back?
Right.
We have the highest rate of suicide, one of the highest rate of suicides among our young. We have one of the world's highest unhappiness rates, etc., among our young. So there's a disparity. Young people, and it's factually that young people aren't doing that well.
Right.
And it makes it even worse when you consider that we have the world's largest youth demographic. 630 million people are below the age of 25.
Right.
Over 710 million are below the age of 29. And to this day, we have zero member of parliaments. Zero member of parliaments below the age of 30, and this has been the case since January of 2018. In 2014, we had 12 member of parliamentarians below the age of 30, and all 12 of them were dynasts. So these disparities, these paradoxes that exist, are the reason that Young India Foundation was started, because
Right.
systematically we are being disenfranchised, legally we are being barred, and socially we are ostracized. So then this is what we're trying to kind of change out.
Right. I have found in a lot of people who come to America or who go to England from India, young people much like you and I, they sort of want to escape. Escape is the proper term they use. They find themselves better off here in a more personal sense. There is this mobility from the in group outwards, right? What is your fascination with India? Why do you think why are you still fascinated or in love or in a romantic relationship with India to this degree?
I'm not in a romantic relationship with
No?
India. I don't think it's fascination. What I do think is it generally just where you feel more comfortable with, where you feel at peace with, and that's and I'm all about community and living and being brought up in Alabama. I saw that I was always the one that was outside the group. I was the one that was ostracized, and being and making up the diversity in a very white, or like rural uh, context made me realize how important being one of us or having a community is. So I don't think I'm in love, kind of that fascinated. I just feel at peace and home. And what's to say that I'm not escaping? I'm escaping this place, right? I'm trying to, as far as I can, from the states to where I belong. So I
Right.
think we're all looking for escapes. We're all looking for comfort. We're all trying to find our peace and where we, really see. And yeah, some people who have been brought up in India have the opportunity to come to the States because they find themselves at peace, whether it's through convenience, luxury, whatever it is. That's all of us, right? And I find my peace and my content and my passion back home. So I'm trying to escape there, right?
And this passion is of a nature of a struggle, of a continued action towards the betterment of the society, of your what you call home, right?
Yeah, so home to me at the end of the day isn't a country, it's a community, it's people, right? So, like Rabindranath Tagore said, the country isn't like the land beneath the earth; it's the people, right? And so, yeah, I think I found actual love with the people that I've been surrounded myself with, and I have found I hate to say this, but a purpose as well. I genuinely feel like I am doing what I can do to the best of my abilities with what I do, whether
Right.
it's through Young India Foundation, whether it's through other work that I've done.
Right.
So why not, right?
Just to get the semantics clear, since your effort is to
These aren't semantics. Come on.
no. But the next question is more semantical in nature. Since
Yeah.
part of your effort is to contest the concept of youth in India, how do you define youth? What is youth? Because Rahul Gandhi is clearly not youth.
No, it's
Right.
Narendra Modi.
No, definitely not. I mean,
उनको भी युवा कहते हैं.
really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
We do a lot of workshops in rural India, and youth is a state of mind to them, or youth is more of a concept that's fluid, right? And you can argue that it is, right? But when you legally speak of it, no, there are obviously age barriers of what it's considered to be a youth, right? Then there are age brackets to be what is considered a youth, right? And then there are also, because if we go, if we take the justification of a youth of as an age barrier or as a age bracket, then what happens is if you take the fluid definition in your social life, that comes at the expense of young people. For example, again, like we do a lot of workshops in Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, Punjab, and we start off questions like, well, what do you think is a youth? And most people would, be like fit, active, curious, immature, blah, 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 adjectives they would describe. And then you would have to lead them on, be like, okay, give us an age bracket. And that age bracket would go anywhere between, I've heard anywhere between the ages of 10 to 45, 40, etc., right? And these are real, people genuinely believe that that's you. But the reality is according to UN definitions, a youth is anywhere between the ages of 15 and 29, or 15 to 24, and India's definition is 15 to 29. And when we think about that, the youth at that age bracket is more than 300 million people, right? So then how can you consider a 45-year-old, a 50-year-old? Because literally our youth Congress presidents, our BJP Yuva Morcha presidents, our youth party presidents are 45, 40, 50 years old,
Maybe
right?
that's why India has no problem with mid-age crisis, right? Because we don't have a mid-age,
We-
it seems like.
No, because it's either you're always a youth or then automatically when you hit 55, 60, you're a grandparent, now you're a Buddha, right? But
Right,
even
you're
they would
obviously.
not even consider that.
I mean, Modi's really not considering himself one, so yeah.
No, not at all. But that's a problem, and that mentality comes at the expense of actually people that are young. And that's what we're trying to really fix. So we stress that age barrier. We didn't make our own age barrier or age, legal definitions. We're just taking what international organizations, more than 120 countries have prescribed as what it means to be a youth. We're taking what India defines as youth and saying, all right, India, you win. You say anywhere between the age below the ages of 29 is a youth, right? So then, or between the ages of 15 and 29, and we take anyone below as well because they're obviously going to, age into the 15-29 age bracket, and we say, where's the representation? Where are your policies? In your talks and your rallies, you're screaming the word youth and young. Look around you, surround yourselves, and it's not just a political problem. Let's get that clear. Bureaucratically, in our judiciary, and then obviously like in society and then in politics as well. There's no representation of young people.
Right. Right.
That's what we need to really fix.
Is there a comparative example that you could give me so I'm more enlightened on the subject where there is more mobility for the youth, where there is, say, youth in judiciary and youth in political representations?
Yeah, I mean, think of any developed country besides the United States being the only exception, and that's also because the United States has an aging demographic. The baby boomer age, the vast majority are. I would argue that the baby boomer equivalent of India is right now what we're going through. That's why we have such a huge rate of young people at that age. But anyways, that's the equivalent. European countries, so the UK, for example, the entire United Kingdom in the past 10 years has decreased their age, 15 years, has decreased their age 3 times of voting, of candidacy. Now they're thinking to decrease the age of candidacy when you can be an elected MP to the age of 16. Right now they've decreased it to 18 from 21. Voting was decreased from 21 to 18. And they're constantly evolving and changing, and young people are coming out. All these Scandinavian countries, they have it to 18, both voting and aging, voting and age of
Electing,
candidacy,
yeah.
elected,
Yeah,
running, and et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of these countries that allow people from a certain age have youth representation. It's not that they don't. There was this report on interparliamentarian, and it focused more on the European nations, and even in the EU parliamentary elections, they've had an increased amount of young people participating.
Right. What is the age of candidacy in India?
25. 25 for Lok Sabha, 30 for Rajya Sabha.
Right, right. With all the instances, the statistical instances that you gave me for conceptualizing the problem, this almost this huge fucking problem that the youth in India have. How does it translate? What are the specifics? What is actually that you found that the youth is bereft of in India? What is it not being given?
Voice. Voice that translates to representation, that translates to opportunity, that translates to, where, this mass just circle of problems that we are surrounded by. And again, once you don't have that representation, once you don't have that voice, once you don't have that opportunity, you can't fix those problems.
Right.
And that is what we're really deprived of. Once we have young people who understand young people, I don't need your sympathy. I need your empathy, right? Because I can feel sorry for babies in Africa all I want, but until I'm actually fixing that issue or working upon it or changing my life to better fit or at least help those people there, then what's that? What's the sympathy for, right? In the same context, we can talk all we want about young people and try to say that, but unless you understand and unless you're actively fixing those issues, there's no point. We've had comparatively young leaders from political dynasty families, and now they, whatever, and we love to call them youth leaders and symbolize them and deify them. But what have they really done, right? So it's not just about making one youth leader. It's not about making 10 youth leaders. It's about actually getting young people's voice,
Right.
collectivized, vocalized, and fixed on those problems.
Somebody who would want to contest your viewpoint on this subject might say why you would assume that older people cannot empathize with the youth or have a voice for them. How would you respond to that?
So, first of all, give us proof. Give us why are still India's young doing so horrendously bad in India compared to people in the region of South Asia, compared to Asia, compared to the world, right? When you have such a huge demographic, right? Why aren't young people doing better? And forget about that. We're not talking about discrimination. We're not going against old people. We're not trying to, say like, oh, old people don't understand us, etc. We're just simply saying that we want intergenerational justice. We want equality between the young, the middle-aged, and the elderly. But to get that equality, you can't just preach equality and do nothing about it. You need to raise the standard of which the young people are in the current dynamics and the current settings. That is why we focus on this young demographic, to raise them to the standard that the middle age and the elderly have an access to the world. And then from then on, we'll talk about equality.
Wouldn't you say that this, and again, this is again just playing the devil's advocate to get your position more clear, but isn't there something you earn with age that allows you the privilege of more accessibility to? I mean, simply put, just experience the fact that there could be a sense of naivety when it comes to young leaders, which, and history is thorough with instances of that too.
No, it's not.
I mean, enough instances of young people leading things into. Of course, you don't hear about it often enough because that cannot be glorified. They're failures, but you would naturally expect young people to be bereft of experience, wouldn't you?
Well, give me an experience. Give me some
I mean,
examples.
I mean, empirically speaking, wouldn't your father be more wise than you are?
It depends on the topic of what we're talking about, because my father does not know more about Facebook than I do, which, by the way, is literally running half of India's politics to this day.
For sure.
My father doesn't know about the current dynamics of, let's say, cyber privacy, cyber law, or let's move on from that. Let's talk about education, right? What is the curriculum that I need, right? Even though my father was a professor for 15 years, right? What is the education that I can be better molded to in the current age and world that I live in? I think experience is a very crapshoot argument where it's just, oh, let's give it to that. But here's the thing: 15 years ago, our world was completely different, right? The way that we are in this classroom, the things that you're doing were probably very
Impossible.
far off from what you are able to do. In the next 15 years, it'll completely change. Now, the current dynamic, the current leadership, right, that we have, again, we're a gerontocracy, right? A 73-year-old president, a 67-year-old prime minister, a 72-year-old vice president, above 65 in terms of our leadership, right? The average age of a member of parliamentarian being 58. In the Rajya Sabha, it's 61, et cetera, right? These differentiations, where our average age, again, half of our country, more than half of our country is below the age of 25.
Right.
So when you're thinking about these dynamics, we are living in a completely different world,
Right.
which is being governed by a generation that's far beyond what we're living in.
Right.
So I'm not saying take them away, do this. Our issue, and people love to kind of the feedback or the pushback, I would say, on us is, oh, you can't just it's the same thing experience, you can't take it away. There's never been a discussion of getting rid of these leaders. There's never been a discussion of saying, oh, we don't want old people to represent us. We're just saying increase the representation of young people.
Right.
Right? So we're not saying, oh my God, all the experience, quote unquote, experience people go away. No. But people that are living the life that we do, people that are going to colleges, that are seeing that the fundamental problems that for example, a representative that recently graduated from college, whether with debt that he took loans from, right? Whether the lack of access and the lack of knowledge that he learned, the actual skills, holistic skills that he didn't find in college, knows how to fix that system that is inept of providing to this young generation, more than the 6-year-old political stalwart who probably hasn't gotten off his car or gone to a college unless he's actually giving a lecture, a political stalwart, right? So that's differentiation. And even if we have 5, 6 representatives, right, that are vocalizing those concerns and saying, listen, our young people are not holistically receiving skills in our education curriculum because all they study is this, and this, and they have to rely externally to, let's say, figure out how to edit a podcast, right? Or learn about technology in a way, or figure out these very life general skills that weren't accessible or thought about 15, 20 years ago, but are now needed to actually prosper in life. That political stalwart won't understand.
Right.
He won't be making the private members bill for that. He won't be advocating for these things that we find to be downright like basic things that we need to be given.
Right.
And by the way, when I'm talking about our current leadership, I also want to stress the fact that there are some progressive politicians, but you always have to look at who is making these bills and private members bill and leading the voices behind them, because what I found in my experience, most of them, they're literally their MP staff, which is full of young people, by the way, is pushing these bills out. So many of these land fellows that I've met, so many of these ex political members who, and then they're still working there, right, under the MP's office, are presenting these bills, drafting them, trying to motivate and then force these MPs to put out. I can think of the recent transgender bill. I can think of the recent. A variety of bills that were
Right.
passed that were actually formulated, pushed by the staff rather than just the MP, but the MP takes credit, right?
Right.
So you need so it's already we have such a backing of young people. All we're saying is put them in the limelight.
I mean, it was kind of apparent when Mark Zuckerberg was called to a congressional hearing here and the parliamentarian. I mean, it's just so the fact that people like you and me were listening to the questions that were being put forth and just like sort of scoffing and laughing. It was very obvious that we, or people of our generation, more competent people, at least more competent than I am, could have dealt with the problem far better than these older stalwarts who probably don't even understand the extent of how Facebook and whatnot operates.
Go to a parliamentary committee in India, and then go to an assembly committee, which, by the way, probably never meets, because no one has a sense of enforcement at that end, and understand how these people are getting, I think, understanding and getting access to this information and what they're doing with it, right? You would be surprised it'd be almost similar or just as similar as that Mark Zuckerberg hearing. And the only reason that, that was put out all across the world was because it was obviously being
relevant.
recorded, relevant, Mark Zuckerberg, U.S. Congress, etc. Immaculate that in any technology aspect, in any, I'm saying any cultural event that, that is relevant to us, do that in the assemblies, any state assembly, and do that in parliament. And you'll see the same results.
Right.
Most, if not, so yeah, I mean, you might have your exceptions as
Right.
well, but
So these barriers that, or at least these deficiencies that the youth has in India, do you think these are
barriers, not deficiencies. Yeah.
barriers, right?
Yeah.
These barriers. Do you think these are more a factor of institutional hazards or cultural hazards, or what do you think is it?
They are a product of systematic disenfranchisement, right? They are a product of ageism, right? So societal stigmas, and they are a product of downright barriers, legal restrictions, right?
Right.
It's a mix of all three, and because they all come together, that is why young people are so disenfranchised. So yeah, I 100% think that it's a product of all three that have really polarized in that sense.
Right.
This young demographic.
So it's both embedded in the legal schema, the laws as such, and also like the
Society.
and society as a culture. Because if we are referring to Rahul Gandhi as being youth, there is pretty much no scope for youth. We have
Forget about
kids.
leaders.
Right.
How we speak to young people. Abhi to bachet.
Right.
You're just a child,
Right.
right? You're scolding, scoffing. You're completely like what will you do? That kind of stuff.
Right.
That that is that barrier that we really want to fix and work upon and change. And I was talking about polarization, and that's super important for us to talk about, because at the end of the day, young people are looking for an identity,
Right.
and an identity that isn't based off of just caste or religion. But we see that, right?
Not
So-
regressive social constructs, at
but
least.
that's the thing. In a lot of the work that I've done and I'm seeing, young people are going back to the regressive connotations and identities that we thought we had come out of. This new generation still is, for example, protesting in Haryana with the Jat agitation,
Oh my
and
God,
Jat
yeah.
background, which was out in the streets. It was just young people.
It
It was
was-
young Jats,
Yes,
right?
it was horribly regressive.
Whether it was Gurmeet Ram Rahim Singh's case, you saw young people, almost willing to kill themselves for a god man who was charged for rape.
Right.
So why are we doing that? And I realized that it's a need for an identity, right? If we have an identity, you and I can be considered, I can be considered a founder of, YIF. That's my identity, or a student at Columbia. You have an identity of a student as a Columbia student, et cetera, whatever, right? or people have jobs identity, like I work here, I work there. When you think about India's case, there's so many people that are not working, not in school, don't even have a family because they don't have worker to provide for them, and if they don't, like if they do have a family, that they can't provide for that family. Then where does that identity come from? They're seeking an identity, right? And then they have to rely on these what we think of backward notions, because at least that's an identity given. At least they're not useless at that point, because they're at least
Now
in
they have a
some
role
way,
to play.
yeah. So in Gurmeet Ram Singh, there was someone they were part of their Dera Sacha Soda, right? And they did work for that, or they part of it. That was a community that they got. If like for the Jat agitation, they were for their caste, the upliftment of their society, this, that, and you'll find that in every other caste as well. It's not just for the upper, lower, Dalits, etc., whatever, it's all. So I believe that, once you have representation, once you're fixing on those issues, and once you're trying to give back an identity to these young people, then we won't be as regressive as what we've seen.
Right. How do you plan on giving the sense of identity to young people?
Sense of importance, sense of value, right? It's not just, we want to make every single person a member of parliament, we want to make every single person an MLA, and it's not just about, everyone needs to have a job. Ideally, yeah, but if you're valued, that is really important too. I mean, think about it. You and I in our daily lives, if someone values us and gives us attention and gives us their time of day, we feel better about ourselves. And I 100% know you do, and I do for it as well, right? No matter, how pretentious we think we are, or how backwards we might be, or,
It's a primal need.
Yeah, and once we do that, once you're giving that aspect, and once you make people realize that you're valued, especially a young generation, your feedback, etc., then I think that helps. Right. That helps in, the system is taking your concerns in, it's listening to you, it's digesting your concerns, etc., right?
So it's basically giving a voice to the youth so they feel valued in that process.
Yeah,
right?
A voice to the youth, but giving value to young people.
But it's hard for me to imagine without, say, a job, without, say, something to keep myself occupied with. How would just perennial attention give me a sense of being? You know what I mean? Like, say, like you said, if you don't aim.
Why did you start this podcast?
Huh?
Why did you start this podcast?
Why did I start this podcast? That was me giving myself attention if to fit it in your paradigm. But like, how would you imagine? And again, that's occupation. It's keeping myself busy, right?
This is keeping you busy because outside of your class, outside of your school, this is giving you an identity, right? I've seen you promote this podcast. I've seen how much, and especially your group as well, the club that you have. When I think of you, I think of your club, and I think of your podcast recently, but still, right? This is what you've really invested in. With that same essence, because you find value in space in that club, and you find value in space here as well, outside of your academic needs. In that same context, right? It sounds very simple, but if you are given value, right? We talk about people need roti kapda makan, right? But I think this goes back to this idea of, so maybe I'm stretching this too far, but I genuinely think so. Why is Lalu Prasad Yadav
still relevant?
Still not just relevant, but so loved, even though everyone's he's so corrupt, he's dangerous, he's that. But the fact is that Lalu Prasad Yadav was able to give for especially lower caste minorities like Muslims an identity, a voice, and that drastically changed Bihar politics for a very long time. He was in power for 7 years. His wife was in 5 years. They were back in power for 2 years, etc. So Lalu Prasad Yadav might be the most corrupt, might be the most awful, but at the same time, the poor that he might have taken advantage of still are infatuated by him. They will only vote and see Lalu Prasad Yadav because he was able to give them identity. So past your jobs, past your food, past your roti kapda makan, you give me an identity that I didn't have before, I don't care about that job.
Right.
At least you gave me an identity. At least I am something rather than just useless, this, that, whatever.
A cog of a machinery, right? Like
that. I mean, I was gonna use some casteist terms, but I guess that would get too complicated, right? But you understand the whole dynamic in India, where it's a pushback between, let's say, a majority caste and then a minority caste, and going back and forth, right? And if, let's say, the others in power, then that minority caste just doesn't have value and identity, right? So at that same time, that's what we're saying. We're trying to give you an identity that your feedback is valuable. reading an article quite recently about Lalu Prasad Yadav, and he's in hospital, right? And what he does is this auto rickshaw guy who migrated from Bihar to Bombay because that's where he was hospitalized.
Because
Lalu
that's
Prasad Yadav, approached a journalist and was like, "Hey, can you connect me, or can I just see Lalu Prasad Yadav? Gee, he's my god, he's my this, whatever."
right.
And the journalist just shook him off, but at the end of the day, started giving him. Lalu Prasad calls him up and tells him, bring some meat for me as well, kyunki aaj Bakri Eid or whatever.
Right, right.
So he ends up sharing a plate, and like he wanted to talk so much about his job, his sons do something, but at the end of the day, he was like, I'm sharing meat with Lalu Prasad Yadav.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's all I need.
He
No
felt
one has
valued.
valued me, right?
Right,
Exactly. So
right.
that's what we're trying to do, and that's what we're trying to give back as well. The sense of at least having some value.
Right.
We've gone on, but
Piggybacking off of Lalu Prasad Yadav, what do you think of the current political scenario in India? Or would you refrain from commenting? Feel free to.
No, I mean the only thing that I know. So I'm not a psephologist, and I'm not gonna act like I know much. I also don't like to kind of piggyback on current dynamics because everyone is one way or the other. Either they're a bhakt or they're a liberal tard, etc., whatever, right? And I think both are so polarized because if it's not Modi, it's not anyone else, or if it's oh my God, Modi is the
autocratic,
dictator. No, even beyond that,
Right.
like it's for the constitution. I'm more of a moderate in that thinking, right? I think that there are fundamental flaws that we need to fix about this government, but also the system in general, and then politics. So the only thing that I want to comment on is that regardless if it's the Congress Party, or if it's the BJP, or if it's a third front, whatever you do, India is a gerontocracy. And my skill sets, my pursuit, my knowledge is I want to fix that gerontocracy. And then I believe that if that gerontocracy is fixed, it will have an impact on more approachable, just, dignified, and overall better leaders.
Right.
That's my thinking.
What do you think is the role of the youth in India's future?
Every little bit. It is our future. It is our present, right? So when I hear now, and there has been an active push, right? So people say youth are not interested in politics. That's baloney, right?
Oh, that's absolutely bullshit.
And it's a false rhetoric that's propagated by obviously the system, but also media as well, right? The reality is not only are we since 2009 actively exponentially coming out to vote, and with the legal barriers. Did you know? I just recently started a political party. Did you know that the Election Commission of India does not allow anyone below the age of 18 to even join a political party? I get voting, sure, 18, right? Fine, 25 is the age of contest, but you can't even, until you're 18, vocalize your concerns to a representative feeling that they're your own, because neither can you vote, neither can you contest, nor can you even join a political party. All over the world, it's up to the political parties and what their age barriers are. Some are 13, some are 15, some are 16, 18. But India is one of those countries that has a law in its basically system by the ECI that does not allow anyone below the age of 18. These are these age barriers, these systematic issues that come in the way.
Right.
Right. So yeah, at the end of the day, I think that it is about us. Everything is about us. And and I stress this so much. I don't think there's this rhetoric of thinking about our future overall and how if this present government comes back in, how risky that is. I don't buy that. What I do like to sell and also buy is the fact that it's not about this much larger picture, but a day-to-day picture, right? We need to be picking representatives that are going to help us. This election isn't about to save the Constitution or save all our culture, because I think our Constitution and our culture and our identity, however varied it might be, is much stronger than that. But what isn't as strong is our system. What isn't as strong is our day-to-day functioning and how regressive we've become and how alienated we've made the young to be. So this election and any election so on, and no one brought these issues up, is about how to make India's system, India's politics, India's society much more receptive and welcoming to young people in their daily lives. Again,
Right. So I know from whatever I get off social media and the limited interactions that I have with you, I know you try to you make an attempt of equipping people with knowledge. What are the other things that Young India Foundation does to create that future that you think is
actually helping young people contest. So as something as simple as filing your nomination paper, which are really complicated in India and people don't know, raising efficacy levels of actually contesting, working on their paperwork, working on their social media, working on grassroots level campaigning, working on booth analysis, voter IDs, all that is taken care by Young India Foundation. So we are helping candidates actually contest elections, which is unheard of, right? Everyone's like, no, what is this? This is a scam, whatever. And we're doing it all for free. So that's big. Our big thing. Raising efficacy is what we're trying to do, right?
right?
And trying to basically break down this youth glass ceiling. That's at the end of the day what we're.
How do you screen for the people you recruit or you endorse? If Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's actually a very natural grassroots way, right? So we tried both ways. We tried, let's say, filling out nomination papers. People would approach us. What happened then was we were getting a very specific, catered crowd that was already interested in politics, had already been in politics, was trying to find a way to like get a way in. Then we started using our networks and saying, how about they let people find others? And we've found much more of a genuine crowd, which is super interesting. We have found people because of other young people. I love talking about this example. One of our wife in charges, Menderjeet Singh, took his scooty after realizing that his ancestral village wasn't going through actual elections because they had made the other young person sit down. And he goes from pind to pind in Punjab in his Honda scooty on his own dime, trying to see and encourage young people to contest. And he was able to find two candidates. One, Inderpreet, who is a retired army man's daughter, a 21-year-old that was studying law, who was passionate about contesting. And the other, Harshpreet, who was also wanting to contest as a bunch, right? So that is that organic way.
Right.
And in terms of screening, I think, obviously we do a background check. We figure out, if they have any cases, if they're whatever. But it's really, what's super important is just asking around in the village, asking around, getting their information. And
Right.
you get to see that, they're genuine. You see a history. Like, for example, in Preet, she's not politically connected. Her father's a retired army man. She's, studying at a government law college. And she's a proactive young woman who wants to see a better country, but more importantly, a better surrounding.
Right.
And that's all you need at that point. And yeah, there's a much more active way of screening for people that approach us, and we've actually denied every single person that's approached us because after figuring out someone was connected to the youth parties, someone had this background, someone was this, and they're pretty shady people as well.
Right.
And sadly, a lot of the people that that even were fairly young, they were just there wasn't something organic about them,
Right.
and that's super important for us
Right.
too.
I mean, authenticity and organicness, and considering the means through which you do your screening, you can parse through the negative aspects that you'd want to avoid. How do you screen for, or do you screen at all for like competence would have to figure in too, because representatives are supposed to be leaders. How do you pick the person you endorse? What if they're not competent? You know what I
Do
mean?
you know what a sarpanch does?
What a sarpanch is? Yes, I do know what a sarpanch is.
Do you know what it does? The position.
Kind of, yes. I have a
Give me
fair
an
idea.
example.
It to me, I think the condensed version would be that they're the eyes and the ears for the government on the village level.
No, they are no, because they're not in eyes and ears for the government. They're in eyes and ears for the people, right? आपकी गली है, ठीक है? सड़क बनानी है, छोटी सी, yeah, a small road that needs to be built, or someone needs a water pump, right? Or the bathrooms in the schools aren't fixed. They're not making big ass policies. They're not, framing the philosophical thought of the country. What they're doing is, okay, I'm a poor person. I have been, because of the government at the big level, been given my daily wage. I need 8 hours that I can actually work, and then the money. that is at the hand of the sarpanch and panch at the local level, and that's where we focus on. So it's the day-to-day active life that we're really trying to focus on and work upon, and that is what's being provided at the sarpanch and panch level. So you don't. It's not about it's about competency in terms of, because I've seen with a privileged life, have a very very quick temperament to say, oh, competency comes from education and education is important and all that. That's bullshit. You don't need to be educated and go to Harvard or go to a college to be a sarpanch or panch.
Right.
Right? You need to again, it's the whole idea of you need to be empathetic and understand the problems of these young people. And who better than to someone who's been born and brought up that makes up the vast majority of the demographic age profile, that has had the privilege of maybe even having education, that's going through education, and a thought process, a new way of thinking that they can apply to.
Right.
What's better than a young person to do that? So no, I don't think there's a fight of competency. And up till now, all of our candidates have been farly educated, more so than the previous sarpanches, but also that. But I don't even consider education a criteria.
Not saying education is, but it also seems like, which I think you've gotten it right with your philosophy on this, is that the true problems of India are more on a day-to-day level, and the required competence is just authenticity, because there's this leakage due to an inauthentic, this personal, this self-interested nature of leaders that causes a lot of problems, right? And so authenticity sort of does the job for competence as far as the day-to-day problems are concerned.
No, I mean 100%. I mean, it sounds, Shashi Tharoor talking about all these ideas sounds brilliant, but when you think about it, what is Shashi going to do for me? What is Shashi going to do for the villager in Haryana? How is he going to do that? So we need to be focusing on these young leaders who are on grassroots level.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, but whether it's Bharti J. Pandey, whether it's Shashi Tharoor, whether it's all these so-called progressive leaders, what have they actually done? Besides write their own books, make a lot of money off of it, give a lot of their own PR for people's young. I mean, it's great to share an article of their progressive thought, but then at the end of the day, it's about fixing our own lives.
Right. There is also this disparity, because progressivism begins and affects the grassroots, but this disparity in India between classes, right? Shashi Tharoor exists on a whole different plane than the farmer in Haryana, right? So his progressive thought, as modern and as Anglo-Saxon as it might be, has very little to do with the very Indian problems of that village farmer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that also you have to consider that, Shashi Tharoor also represents Kerala, and
which is a very
it's very much more different than what, let's say, a farmer in Haryana has to face, etc. So I think he does appeal to them.
Right.
He had nominated, for example, the Kerala fishermen for their work for the Nobel Peace or something of that nature. So that that makes sense for them. But again, that was just one example. There are many more. It's just about the localization of our leaders and the emphasis of getting these young, hopefully progressive leaders to empathize with what we need or what they need.
Right. I remember we were talking about Bhagat Singh earlier as well, and that there is this, to me at least, there is this fetishization of the idea of Bhagat Singh. What are your influences in terms of your philosophy on politics and youth rights?
So when it's a talk about youth rights, I think youth rights is something that's being constantly reformed, formalized, because when you think about quote unquote youth rights, it's not a field that's been really worked upon. You have
it's
child
not a discipline,
right? And you have aging
human rights and so on,
but not youth rights. But again, I think that is the interdisciplinary nature of youth rights, because it is intersectional. What we talk about when we talk about youth rights is that we need to be thinking of all these larger issues from a youth angle, from a youth perspective, because the effects of whatever policy we're making has an effect on the vast demographic of young people. So everything we formulate, everything we look, needs to be thought about that perspective, because if you talk about hypothetically national security, right? The 70-year-old national security advisor is thinking from his head about what he thinks about Pakistan, but his actions we will have to deal with for the next 20, 30 years, right? So I am an advocate of, that's fine, your experience is great, but think of what let's say, this generation wants from, let's say, on national security vis-a-vis relations with Pakistan or China or this or that. Put special focus and attention on that with your experience attached. So again, I don't think that frames our ideology, but I think what frames our ideology in terms of what we're trying to do. I am a student of contemporary politics, right? So I have my go-to and my basis of John Rawls, right? And theory of justice, and really specifying on the equality of opportunity, right? So it's not just fun and all to talk about opportunity and trying to get them. It's everyone should have access to positions or jobs or fair access to these things.
Or at least expression, right?
Whatever it is, right? So when we're talking right now, we're talking about youth rights and representation.
Right.
It's not just about having access to it, but the fair chance of having that access. Right. So it's not about it's all good and all, you can have that chances, but making sure that everyone, taking a random group, right, of a young person from Assam to a young person in Bandra, to etc., have the same equal chance of getting to that position. And that's what we're all about, right? We're trying to, YAF in general is trying to push those boundaries and barriers and to increase those chances of young people.
Right. Feel free to not answer this question. It was more of a coy question that I'd written out. But can we expect Sudhanshu in the electoral political sphere in the future?
I don't know if that life is for me. I love what I'm doing, but at the end of the day, I'm also super realistic. Am I the best fit? And at the end of the day, I think it has to be, if I'm the best fit at that time and opportunity, I would love an opportunity. But at this point, I'm not, because there are so many more people, young people, that are much better, that are much more relatable, that understand more. Even though I might have my quote-unquote experience of running these campaigns, of doing this. But again, it's about being empathetic. And do you think I have the most empathy whether I run for a sarpanch or a bunch to understand that village, to understand that dynamics? Not now. So can't talk about the future, but for sure not now. But I genuinely believe that we need more young people. Those young people exist, and I would love to devote my time finding those young people
Than being the
rather
young person.
being that
young person, right.
And I'm genuinely passionate about that movement. So right now, that's what I'm interested in, rather than just working on my own campaign, because that's boring.
But you recently did start a political party too. What, a day from now?
So what we're doing right now is how the ECI works is you're supposed to launch the party and then apply for the formal work. So we've did the first wave, then there's 2 steps to the ECI registration. So we did start a political party, but I'm not the president of that political party, nor do I have any plans to be so. And other people will take up that mantle. I'm focused on creating pathways for these young people.
Right.
Again, it goes back to my background and my identity as being brought up in America, studying in all these places, is I've learned that I can make those pathways for people, right? And that's what I want to focus my at least young life on.
Right.
Because again, many of us will be able to somehow break that glass ceiling. We have a 26-year-old in Haryana that's contesting, but he's a grandson of a chief minister, a son of a sitting MP, MLA, etc., whatever, right? They will always find that way to reach the top. But really shattering that glass ceiling so then any of these young people have that same chance of opportunity is what I'm passionate about.
Right. What is this political party called again?
Young India Party.
Young India Party.
So we've started that, and that's just basically a way to put more pressure on other contemporary politics. And again, that inspiration I took from the Green Party here in the States. Single-handedly, even though they have 0 representation in the Senate, 0 representation in the House of Representatives, they were able to get 2% of the popular vote in the 2016 elections with Jill Stein. And at the same time, they've single-handedly changed the Democrats to go far left in their environment issues, and they've also shifted the Republicans in the nature and discourse of environment issues to be more quote-unquote progressive about it, right? And that is the appeal for a single issue party. And that same essence, we're not, Young India Party won't talk about national security, defense, etc. What we're thinking about is these day-to-day things that affect young people, and hopefully encouraging other young parties or not young
Youth
parties, but
parties.
parties in
Right.
general, to cater towards, gravitate more, and include these young people. So it's not just the 40-year-old that's the youth president or whatever of the youth wing. It's the actual 25-year-old that's the what. Then their manifestos, having these like actual engagements rather than just rhetoric, like, oh, we'll do this, this, and this, we'll provide you jobs. Right. It's about really the day to day.
Right.
So that's what we're trying to do with Young India Party, is to put more pressure. And at the end of the day, I will be happy if we don't get a single seat.
Right. Right.
But we are able to change all
discourse,
political parties
right.
on their discourse of how
About
they
the
interact of young people.
Right.
That's our focus and
Right.
goal.
So, Young India Party, Young India Foundation, and Sudhanshu Kaushik. Where do you see all of this 10 years from now?
Well, I'll be now I'm 24, 34, so hopefully I've moved on from that, because I think that what I'm saying is, what I've said before, is to make an impact and hopefully, lead that way, but then people take over.
Right.
So I'll move on from that, but I'll still be, trying to find, I don't know what I can say about there being 10 years from now, but for the next 5 years, for sure, I'll be working on this until I'm 30, for sure. The 29 age, for especially Young
And
India
you will
Party.
stand by principle when you.
100%. So I will step down from Young India Foundation because we focused on the 21 to 25 age demographic, from Young India Foundation.
Right,
for
because
sure.
there is like, I cannot relate to the PUBG generation at all. Like, and that, even as casual as that is, it just goes on to say that there is a certain maturation, there's a certain age that I find myself not being able to relate to that, right? So you do understand that at 30 or 35 or whatever,
100%.
it's going to be, yes, it's
Yeah,
going to be
yeah.
very
So
different.
100%, and
Right.
I've made it happen, and we're looking at the next generation of leadership. But my responsibility isn't over until I make it sustainable enough. If I founded it, it has to be sustainable. So in the next 5 to 10 years, Young India Foundation lives on. It's doing its work,
Right.
but that work is being done without us, and that is a true success.
Right. So
You
Young
don't
India
do that.
Foundation and Young India Party go on.
100%.
Right? It's a life of its own
with,
now.
with Young India Party, I think the age increases because it's 29 that we're looking at.
Right.
Because we can't. So for MLA and MPs, and this is something that we want to do, is the age of candidacy is 25. So if we
Right.
just did a limit of 25, we wouldn't have any candidates, right?
Precisely,
So it's
precisely.
25 to do it. So we're being realistic
Right.
in that. So we're trying to
Right.
have anyone below the age of 29 to contest for the party, and I can do that for until I'm 28, 29. That won't be ever critical. But yeah, I generally do believe in moving on, but I think I'll be able to hopefully make some presence felt, but also give some shift towards the discourse of youth rights in India.
Imagining that the youth of India would actually listen to this podcast, because I don't. What would be your message to the youth of India if you could communicate to them at mass?
I say this now, and I've started saying this a lot, is I know it's election time, but obviously vote, but look beyond that, because voting is only just the first step. And I don't think people in India really focus on that, right? Understand, conceptualize, learn more about what this system of governance and system of politics and society are, and go beyond just the voting, go beyond just the narebaji, go beyond just the participating, and understand that there are people behind you that are motivating you to do so, but will obviously give you resources to do so. So I everyone tells everyone to go vote, and I say that's you're only reaching halfway there, because until we're actually participating in the governance, until we're participating in the vocalization of our concerns, then that vote might not mean much.
Right.
So I say go and look further and beyond than just voting.
Right. I know I've been holding you off. You have other commitments, dude. It's been fantastic having this conversation with you. Your passion and your principles are absolutely humbling. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much.
Hey, man.
Take
It's
care.
been a pleasure. Yep.